Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Victor and I are with Family Violence Project. We're the local domestic violence resource center serving Kennebec and Somerset counties. We're so grateful for you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules and joining us. As always, we're talking about hard things, so please do whatever you need to do to take care of yourselves. We also recognize that this is lunchtime, so we may invite some participation, but also understand that you all may be eating, and just wanting to take things in. So no pressure. But like Victor said, this should be very, we are here to be interactive. So if you have questions, want to interrupt, like want to put your hand up through the reaction bar or in chat, that's fine. And also at the same time, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself, because we will be talking about hard things. If you need to step away, if you need to take a breath, that is totally understandable. And we'll stay on afterwards. So if people wanted to talk with us after, we are here. I miss being in person and that natural, after the presentation conversation that would happen, but we can still do that over Zoom as well. And know that our helpline is available 24 hours a day, anytime. So if after this you want to talk, if tonight, you're thinking about things and want to speak with an advocate, the helpline is there 24/7. So feel free to reach out. So we start this presentation on teen dating violence, really looking at the numbers, because people may say, like, why do we need to talk about this? But this, research has been done which solidly shows us how common this is for teenagers. The first statistic, 33% of high school students experience physical or sexual abuse from someone they are dating. That is 1 in 3 teens. That is a lot of kids who are experiencing this. And if we look at the next stat about LGBTQ plus teens, they're experiencing even higher rates of physical and emotional abuse. So this is really important to talk about, with teens, but also as adults to be knowledgeable about this, to be able to have these conversations, because as we see, a lot of kids do not report it to an adult, and a lot of adults either don't know how to handle it, don't think it's happening, or think that they would know if it was happening, but maybe don't think it's happening at all. When, the dissonance in those stats of like it's happening to 1 in 3 teens, yet 81% of parents believe it's not an issue. So those are really scary statistics when we put those side by side. And the fact that a lot of school counselors report feeling unprepared to talk about these things and support students with safety planning and what they need, these are alarming. So we want to support you in feeling more equipped to speak with teens, to support them through what they're going through. And some more statistics about really the impact of abuse. When we look at how this is affecting teens, it is in a big way. When we think about relationships, we're in community for a reason, right? Like this is how we've evolved, is to be with people, to be with partners, to be with friends. And so when any of us are experiencing dating abuse or relationship abuse, it is affecting us. And as teens, those impacts are really great also, because this may be their first time in a relationship. Um, those first relationships are often very intense. So when there is dating abuse, we see that has a very big impact on students. So the first stat about 50% of female students who experienced abuse during a dating relationship contemplated suicide, and a quarter of those made an attempt. Those are really serious numbers to be aware of. So when we hear kids talking about this, to really take it seriously and, see how we can support them and what we can do to help support them in their safety and their choices. And also to talk to kids so that, as a preventative thing about like this, what's okay and what's not okay in a relationship and all that too, to prevent that abuse from happening. And same with male students, it, it really affects students regardless of gender when they're experiencing abuse. And they often, as we saw on the previous slide, may not be able to talk to an adult about it. And there may be many reasons for that. Maybe they're scared. They don't know if that adult will take them seriously. Maybe they've tried and, it was minimized to them. And so we really want to help support, create an environment where kids can disclose, where students can talk about this. I say kids, but we're talking about, young adults. these are people who are, being able to make their own decisions and getting to that place where they are in control, but adults still have some of that control over them. So it makes it a really tricky place for them. So we really want to support students in being able to talk about this, and have a healthy relationship with their bodies, with each other, and being able to talk about all of these things. We see that it's impacted their grades, and that students don't even know how to talk to each other about this. They may have comfort levels that aren't where they need to be for talking about these really heavy things, but they're things that we all go through. So being able to have these conversations is really important. So we'll go to the next slide. So when we talk about domestic abuse or dating violence with teens, we talked about the power and control wheel, I think 2 sessions back, and the teen dating violence power and control wheel is very similar, but there are specific things to teens that stand out. They experience the same sort of verbal abuse, the put downs, name calling. It can be intensified because of being a teen and the way technology can be used with that, the way rumors can fly, all of those pieces, the emotional abuse where teens may not know who they are. As adults, we may not know who we are still, but at least we're a little more comfortable in our skin. Where teens, being a teenager is very hard. And so to have that added stress of in your relationship where your partner is also breaking you down, it really amplifies that impact on the young ones. And so looking at those impacts of the emotional abuse, the taking them down, and the jealousy, that may seem like a really normal thing, the ways that our media may portray that, but their partner may be really using that as a way to control them, as well as the physical violence that we see, you know, being, teens are getting their independence in smaller ways, but it may be scary to report that because they don't want that independence taken away. So when we hear of these things happening, um, it may be scary for kids to report because of that. And then the sexual coercion that may happen, tampering with birth control, forcing their partner to do things that they don't want to do. All of these things are hard enough to talk about before, when consent is involved, but when consent is not involved, it can make it much more intense. Um, and especially with the political climate about the options that kids have, or anyone has right now, it can make that even scarier, to be able to work with other agencies to support that. Like family planning is really important because everyone should have their sexual autonomy. And so when their partner is affecting that really, really makes things hard for teens. And Victor, feel free to add anything you want to that before you go on to the next slide.
Yeah, I think uh, teenage sexuality kind of gets glamorized in our media, right? But there are really real situations that I have not dealt with as an advocate, but our school-based advocate and others have dealt with, of like baby trapping and holes in condoms and that kind of thing. So even though we don't want to think about these things happening with our teenagers, they are. And that's why it's important to talk about. All right. Where we're going to move next is sort of talk about the teen who is affected by dating violence and what that looks like. So, when someone is being abused, there are signs in their behavior, the way they act, their appearance, um, that are noticeable, and they might be subtle, but some of them we'll talk about are things you can keep an eye on in your community with teens you work with, etc. If anyone has any warning signs that they think of while I'm talking that you want to throw out in chat or raise your hand or talk about more, please feel free to do so. So we'll start with one that I think gets the most attention, which is like, uh, someone in a TV show who is being abused. They have the sunglasses and the dark, long sleeves and baggy clothes, etc. And that does happen. So teens may wear different clothes to try and hide any physical signs of physical abuse that have happened to them. They may wear drastically more or less makeup, um, and just try to hide injuries. There's also the flip side of having the control over what you look like taken away. So a teen who maybe is really into baggier clothes and doesn't wear a lot of makeup, all of a sudden doing so because they feel pressured to by their partner, not necessarily because that's how they want to represent themselves. And being able to represent yourself in the ways that make you feel comfortable are so important, especially for teens who are finding their identities. So when teenagers all of a sudden don't look how they used to, some people might chalk it up to a phase, but it's also a point of inquiry to say, like, what prompted this? Changes in mood. We think of teenagers as moody a lot. I was definitely a moody teen because your body's changing, your world's changing, all these things. But there's a difference between normal teenage angst and drastic changes. So becoming depressed, more than just sadness, not being able to eat, bathe, get out of bed, um, sudden mood and personality changes. So a teen who's really laid back and go with the flow is all of a sudden on edge and snapping all the time. Seeming passive or withdrawn. Maybe this was a varsity athlete and all of a sudden they're not doing sports or they're not trying or dancing or singing or whatever it is that they really like to do. Um, and then hypervigilance. So, checking over the shoulder, really being cognizant of who's around, what the environment is, that sort of thing. Almost like they're constantly waiting for something bad to happen. And then becoming isolated is a really, really big warning sign. Again, teen angst, but like we said, this is more drastic. So withdrawing for family and friends, isolation is a really common power and control tactic because if you're isolated, you don't have anyone to reach out to. So for teens, their dating partner may uh, demand they no longer associate with people of the opposite sex, no longer have friends who are supportive, only have the teen who is using power and control as friends as their friends, that sort of thing. Dropping hobbies and passion, like we said before, and it can go along with the depression, but also losing those support systems. And then spending all their time only with their partner or with their partner's group of friends. And so, a teen may become totally cut off from their support systems. And though, you necessarily can't necessarily move away from home at 16, 17, most of us, all of a sudden fighting with their parents constantly or siblings or just pushing everyone away. So those are the big things that we really notice in teens who are experiencing dating violence, and that we think are important to make you all aware of. So if you see them in teens in your community, um, to be able to ask those questions. And we'll talk a little bit more about supporting teens in a bit. Um, but another big point and another big part of power and control in these young relationships that Michelle talked a little bit about, and that also sort of fits with the warning signs, is technology. So teens are super plugged in. We live in this digital age, and that is what these kids were brought up in. So, uh, video game consoles, computers, phones, this and that, they're constantly plugged in, and that makes it easier to keep track of people. So these are some things that teens might be experiencing that to some extent have become normalized and that we should really challenge. But constantly checking in, emails, text calls, etc. The partner using power and control might become irrationally upset if a text or call is missed. And not just constantly checking in, like, texting, how are you every morning, but every hour on the hour, multiple times an hour, all through the night, keeping the teen awake so that they have to constantly respond and then show up to school tired, and drop out of those things that really bring them joy. Tracking location, whether with apps or air tags or stuff like that, but more often for teens, it's demanding photo proof of where are you, who are you with, send me a photo of where you are to prove that you're not doing X, Y, and Z. It's really easy to spread rumors online. So it is totally plausible that a partner in this scenario using power and control would start a rumor in order to isolate their partner further, to embarrass them, to make them feel like they need to do certain things to get their reputation back, or to prove that their reputation hasn't been tainted. And then demanding intimate photographs and possibly sharing them with others. Even though this is against the law, domestic violence is against the law, and it doesn't stop people. And sometimes teens don't realize the weight of it in terms of being registered to the sex offender list and etc. But it puts teens in a really vulnerable position, especially if this is their first relationship and they don't want to lose it. And they're riding this euphoria and this high of having teen love. And that's a great thing. And it's really devastating that teens get taken advantage of in that way. So, these are conversations that I know are happening in schools about, don't take these kinds of photos and share them. But it's a really big point and a really big red flag if it does come up.
Yeah, so, looking at why don't teens report, or why don't more teens report? Because we know a few do, but it's really hard, right? I think, as we know, reporting any sort of abuse that people are experiencing is really hard, and our society isn't always kind to the person who's reporting that. There are some extra factors that go along for teens, such as that minimization that happens, like when teens are in love, what do we call it? Puppy love, or it's a crush, when for them that is a very real, very intense relationship. I think it's easy for people to say, oh, that's not really happening, like, oh, it can't be that bad. But that is not helpful. I think we want to minimize things because we don't want things to be as bad. And so just, making sure to believe teens when that's going on, or like that quote there, you're a teenager, what problems could you possibly have? I know we look at teens like, oh, you don't know how good you have it right now. Like, you just get to go to school and you have your whole life ahead of you. And, we may think like, oh, nothing can be as bad. But it really can be, this is their life. This is their whole life. And so, really just being present when teens are sharing those things. The lack of resources and support is hard because, like, schools, they still have to go to school every day. So if that partner or ex is in school, they may be seeing them. And depending on how big the school is, how seriously the school is taking the abuse, how much they've been able to share with them, that can really change things. We recently heard of a teen that disclosed abuse that they were experiencing, and the school is like, well, you should leave. Not the person who's using the violence should leave, but if you need, if this is what you need to be safe, you should go, because we can't accommodate that. That's a really scary reaction to have, because that's not teaching that person who's using abuse that their abuse isn't okay, right? Like, that's really scary that they're putting that on the victim, the person experiencing the abuse, that they need to, leave in order to be safe. Um, there are Title IX people at all the schools, at all publicly funded schools, that should be able to support teens who are experiencing abuse in being safe. But that doesn't always happen. But know that that is a resource, and we're there for a resource too, for schools and for teens, and for you and for everyone. Um, they're, in order to get a protection from abuse order, that if the person is under 18, their parent has to get it on behalf of them. And if their partner or ex or the abuser is under 18, that person's parent, it would be on that person's parent on behalf of that teen. So that stuff gets kind of messy, right? And it can get kind of hard, but those resources are there, but it can feel really hard to access sometimes. The shame and embarrassment is huge. As Victor said, like that rumor mill, people are going to believe one side over the other. And if someone gets there first, that may be it. And our society is not kind to people who are sharing about their abuse. I think we can all think of a number of stories that the media has portrayed the victim, in not a kind way. And so we know that technology can be used in those ways. Um, it's really challenging. And then the lack of examples of healthy relationships. Again, the media isn't great about how they show relationships. Like, the teen relationship that always comes up in my mind is Twilight, which is a very creepy relationship. He's stalking her, he's following her, he's watching her at night, and yet we've all seen this as romantic. I know I need to get a more recent example, but that one always comes to my mind. And we don't talk about it, right? Like we don't talk about what a relationship looks like, what it should look like, what it shouldn't look like. We don't talk nearly enough about relationships. So kids may be growing up seeing things in their homes and other people's homes on TV, but not really having a context for what it's supposed to look like and feel like between those two people. So being able to talk about these things is really huge. And feel free to jump in too, Victor, if you want to add anything. Okay. So when we think about supporting teens, we really want to provide a safe space that, we can talk to teens. And that can be as us as adult support systems. That can be as parents, as, guidance counselors, teachers, coaches. Being able to talk about these things with teens is so huge. Aunts, uncles, like, it really does take a village to raise children. And so being able to have a space where kids can speak comfortably and safely and openly about what they're going through. It's so big. All of those relationships really can support it, teens when they're experiencing things, including dating violence. Having resources and posters in plain sight. This can be great for like starting conversations. If you see something, like say you're watching TV, say you're watching Twilight, and you see this, to be able to say like, "Hey, what do you think about that? What do you think the privacy should be in a relationship?" I think of that with passwords. Like, you and your partner may, share your passwords on your phones, and you can have a conversation with that. Well, this was a choice that we made. We've been dating for this long. I trust this person. Or maybe I don't share my password because, like, this is my private phone and that's my choice. Being able to have conversations with teens about like those boundaries, the rights and, responsibilities in a relationship. You have the right to that privacy. You have the right to say no. And you have the responsibility to respect when someone says no, right? And like, being able to talk about all of these things is so huge. Developing partnerships with local agencies like us, we're the Domestic Violence Resource Center, but there's also sexual assault crisis and support who works in this area with sexual assault. We work very closely together because these issues overlap and the experiences that people have overlap. Have trainings as part of school-based education, workplace education, all of those things. Being able to talk to kids about what they're experiencing is huge. Having these conversations, I think more doctors are starting to talk about this. I know we're starting to talk more in school. It's so important to just provide that safety. And if people, maybe they don't have to ask those questions in person, maybe like having them submit questions, in another way so it can feel less shaming. But it's really important to be able to talk about this. And when people do disclose, to be able to talk about the behaviors and not the person, because it might be really easy to write off like, oh, that person is such a jerk, or, to name call the abuser. But we really want to call out those behaviors because we know when someone is in a relationship, they still love that person. They may have feelings. And if we, dismiss that person as a whole, they might start they focus on defending them rather than remembering, yeah, like these, this person, the things they're doing are hurtful to me, and I have a right to be safe. I have a right to, feel okay in my relationship. Um, there's also, and I'll put it in the chat, there's a great parent guide from Love is Respect. There's a whole list of resources that we send out to you. Loveisrespect.org is an awesome, awesome website with lots of tips about talking with teens, about relationships. And this could be your child, this could be, friends, children. Like, I think, the more support teens have, the better. And then we also have our resources. If you want to go to the next slide. And I've just put the evaluation in the chat also. Sorry about that. We have our 24-hour helpline. We're here 24 hours a day. People can access us by calling anytime and speaking with an advocate. You can talk about what's going on in your life, in the life of a teen. Just get some support because it is hard. as a parent, you may, if a child discloses what's going on, you may want to go all mama bear or papa bear or parent bear and like, be like, oh, they want you to text all night. Well, I'm taking your phone. Like, well, let's think about what that will do to that teen. Like, is that going to increase safety? Is that going to decrease safety? Is you making that choice for them going to make it so that they don't talk to you in the future? So being able to talk to the teen about like, that sounds really scary. I'm so glad that you told me about this. What do you think would be the safest thing for you to do right now? Like, how can I support you in being safe? Because it is our instinct to like protect that person, but they're in a place where they're making these choices, right? We want to support them in making those choices and keep that line of communication open. So please know that we're here to support you in doing all of that because it is really hard. Um, and then our other services, we do have advocates who go into schools and talk about all of these things with teens, with teachers, all of that. And sometimes they're available to meet with teens in schools, so you can call for that. And we have all of these other services open to everyone, to emergency shelter, court advocates, a liaison to child protective services if a case is open with the state, individual advocacy, support and education groups, and all kinds of training like this. And then we also have our certified domestic violence intervention classes for people who are using violence in their relationships. Oftentimes it is court mandated, but people can do it by choice. And, we also co-facilitate the group for women. This is the group for men that's shown up there. And all survivor services are free and confidential. So we always want to remind people of that. Anything you want to add, Victor? I
No,
think
I think right
we're
at
right
time.
on time. I don't even know how that happened, but feel free to ask questions if anyone has any. And these are our email addresses if people want to reach out or call us with any questions. And I'll put that other document that I mentioned in the chat.